Hello, everybody, and welcome to Episode 9, The Power of Compassion. Now, I think the title is a bit obvious. Compassion for others is a powerful thing that makes the world a brighter and kinder place. We all know that. However, I'm going to dive more into my thoughts on the development of compassion and some ways that I think we should implement it in our quest, or at least my quest, to help make the world a better place. Quick trigger warning, there will be brief mention of suicidal ideation/suicide. Now, without further ado, let's discuss the power of compassion. I believe that, in part, compassion is learned from others. If we are taught to treat others with kindness, that's generally how we continue to treat others. Some of it definitely has to do with what we were taught and how we were raised. However, I personally believe that compassion comes most and grows strongest from overcoming one's own suffering and wishing to help others who are suffering or prevent others from suffering. Here's an example from my own life. I was always the parent friend, the one who always showed up for others in their darkest moments, looked out for the group, and tried to take care of everybody. I later found out that although it is in my nature to be caring, a lot of my behaviors at that time were a trauma response. Go figure. During middle school and high school, almost every member of my friend group was mentally ill. I felt I had to constantly monitor at least two of them to make sure that they weren't showing signs of wanting to kill themselves, at least not more than usual. I took responsibility for the well-being of others, which, by the way, you shouldn't do that, and I was desperate to make sure that everybody was as okay as they could be and that they were getting help and being cared for. It wasn't until my own mental health inevitably tanked and I went to therapy that I realized that I hadn't been okay that entire time either. As much as my friends were anxious, depressed, and sometimes suicidal, I was also extremely anxious and depressed, but I didn't recognize my symptoms because I didn't present them in the same way my friends did. Past me, somewhat selfishly, assumed I was the only mentally healthy one in the group. Boy, was that a lie. And that I had to care for the others. The truth was, I had been hurting for way longer than I realized, and I was just so desperate to stop others from hurting the same way I was. Growing up, I was always friends with the quote-unquote social outcasts, the ones that didn't quite fit in anywhere else. I had a lonely childhood, and I never wanted anybody else to have to feel that loneliness, so I tended to form friend groups with these quote-unquote outcasts. At the time, I just assumed I was doing the nice thing and being friends with people who needed friends. I didn't realize that my desire to be friends with them had less to do with my own needs and more to do with wanting to prevent others from feeling the same loneliness I had. As a result, I didn't have a stable friend group until after I graduated from high school. I also didn't realize that this was at the root of my decisions until going to therapy during college. Just to summarize my main point here, in my personal experience, the compassion I have for others comes from a place of having suffered and struggled with things myself, particularly disabilities and mental health, and not wanting others to suffer and struggle the way I did. That's why I believe that although the basics of compassion can be taught, it isn't fully learned or developed until it comes from a place of wanting to prevent the suffering of others because you yourself have known that suffering already. My opinion is also formed from the experiences of family members and friends who have gone through similar things, where they have been through their own struggles and suffering, and have come out the other side more compassionate people because they don't want others to deal with the same things that they did. It's as if learning the basics of compassion is forging a sword, and growing and developing your compassion through your own struggles is tempering the sword, strengthening it with the fire of your suffering. Now, I'm sure everybody here is familiar with showing compassion to family and friends, but how about strangers? As an example, how many times have you offered food to a homeless person? How many times have you avoided eye contact instead out of embarrassment? How many times have you seen somebody crying in public and stopped to check on them to see if they were okay or if you could help them? How many times have you noticed them uncomfortably and tried to forget about them after you passed by? Now, I'm not necessarily saying this to call you out. I have done all of these things at different points. Sometimes I help, sometimes I don't. But the times I have helped have felt infinitely better. Not only do you get a boost knowing that you did the quote-unquote right thing or the quote-unquote kind thing, but you've also helped somebody out. It hasn't happened to me often, but there's something so refreshing about the genuine concern and kindness of a stranger for you, somebody who's equally a stranger to them. It restores your faith in humanity a little bit whenever you see it. I like to use this as an opportunity to encourage you to be the stranger that helps others and restores somebody's faith in humanity. Now, obviously, if you don't feel safe doing something or you don't feel okay around this person you're considering helping, don't do it. There are some people I don't feel comfortable reaching out to, or certain situations in which I don't feel safe attempting to help them, and that's okay. It's admirable to want to do the right thing, but your safety should be the priority. That said, when you do feel safe and are in a position to help, I strongly encourage you to stop and consider what you might be able to do for that person before going on with your day. Sometimes when I've stopped to help strangers, it ended up leading to a very human interaction that gave me a sense of closeness, not necessarily to the stranger, but to something even bigger, perhaps the concept, the root, of humanity itself. And I think that's beautiful. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Power of podcast series. I hope you enjoyed it and that, if nothing else, it got you to stop and think for a moment. If you have any memorable experiences helping strangers, I'd love to read about them in the comments, and maybe it'll inspire others to do the same. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next episode.